Preparing to live stream. We are about, all right. Welcome everybody. I am here with my friend, Stephen Drum. Steve, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, great to be on with you again, John. Always a pleasure to hang with you.
It's great to have you here. So Stephen and I share a few things in common. First of all, we have sons that love hockey. We're married. We're all staying at home with our entire families. We were both in the military. We enjoy a bourbon and a cigar occasionally. And there's probably many other things, Stephen, that we both love. But one of the things that I know we absolutely have a passion for, and that is actually seeing individuals get to their highest level of their innate potential, developing leaders, creating excellence in organizations, creating high-performing teams. And just a little bit, everybody out there about Stephen, 27 years in the Navy. If you guys are familiar with the Navy, he was just retired recently as a Master Chief. And here's something really cool, because Stephen and I were talking about this. And it's a program that I had been aware of, and I didn't realize that Steve had actually developed this, called Warrior's Edge. It's really about it's about developing toughness, right? In our
Warrior toughness.
Steve?
Warrior toughness. It's Warrior Toughness. I don't know what Warrior's Edge is, but I just want to make that clear.
Okay, yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah, Warrior's Toughness. And here's what happened is, I think, if I understand this right, they pulled you in from the SEAL teams up to Great Lakes. And what Great Lakes is where everybody who comes in the Navy, when you're going through training, whether you're going to go be a bosun's mate or a mechanic, or you're going to be a rescue swimmer or diver, right? Not the special operations forces. But you know what? We're out at ship. I mean, I'm out in the middle of the aircraft carrier. I'll never forget once. It's 2 a.m. And on the 1MC, that's this radio that it goes out through the entire ship, right?
The intercom, yeah.
The whole intercom, right? And they're like, man your battle stations, not a drill, launch the alert 5. And you hear something like that, and instantly you have to be switched on. You got to know exactly where you got to go. You got to be present. You got to do your job in case this is a real threat. It turned out to be, it wasn't an actual threat to the aircraft carrier or the battle group. But when they don't do that, this was not a drill, right? I mean, you got to be switched on instantly. So at all times, like regardless of what's going on or what we're going through, we have to develop toughness, because there's this culture that we have. How would you describe the culture in the military as it relates to a lot of the stuff that you've seen in the business world, Steve?
You know, I'll start with when to go a little bit into the toughness piece, the Warrior Toughness piece. When I came into the Navy in the 90s, and I don't know, while you were in the Navy as well, we very much, of course, special operations, aviation doesn't really necessarily fall within this, but for your average Navy sailor, they get recruited into saying, hey, we're going to teach you a skill. You're not going to be boots on the ground. You're just going to be the one who's smart and the one who's pressing the buttons. And so we became, as a Navy culture, we really kind of embraced that. And in my opinion, a little too much. We became very disconnected from that sailor that was, fighting off the empire of Japan, from from submarine attacks and kamikaze attacks, and really directly engaged in heavy naval combat. And so we became very detached from that. And so I think with the Warrior Toughness program, we want to get back to that. We want to get back into what's important. And so we developed what we really think is a comprehensive and a holistic process that considers all facets of your performance. And so I think the good organizations out there in the corporate world, in the business world, nonprofit world as well, are able to really effectively look at all facets of how they can build stronger teams, how they can build more capable leaders, and how they can definitely, just as an organization, generally raise their performance. The good organizations can do that because they apply a very comprehensive and holistic approach towards all of their leadership development and performance.
Yeah. Now think about this, right? What you're talking about, and this is something I know that you and I both are focused on, is creating a culture of excellence, right? In the military, it was this warfighting excellence. right? In my world, right, it's excellence as a husband, as a father, as an executive coach, as a speaker, as a business owner, as a CEO. And, part of our whole world, right, is all the training that we do is, hey, we don't give up on the ship or the mission. We don't give up on our shipmates, and we don't give up on ourselves. And we are never out of the fight. And what you're talking about with toughness is a way that we can prepare ourselves to be able to be in the fight to our best ability. And right now, there's a lot of people that are really struggling. They're going through some tough times. I was talking to a friend of mine yesterday, business owner, and she was beside herself, but because of the economy, she has to lay off 14 of her 50 employees, and she might have to lay off a few more. And she doesn't know what it even looks like for survival. So, I mean, people right now, there's almost like two groups of people. A few people that either they kind of have a job and a paycheck in a certain industry, and another group that they're either running a business or they don't have a paycheck, and they're really trying to figure out, how do I make decisions in a time of adversity? Something I want to bring out, though, I want to ask you this question, because you frame this around toughness, and a lot of people think about the term resilience, and I think you definitely associate Navy SEALs and SEAL teams and the ethos and the culture there with this culture of resilience. So is there a difference between the two, and why did you name your program Warrior Toughness?
Yeah, it's a great question. And you always have to be, and I always try to be as intentional with my language as possible. That said, people ascribe different meanings or different parts of a definition to certain words. What we found was we would be briefing our program, Warrior Toughness, and we'd be briefing it to high-level folks in the political world, and as well as military leaders and other civilians. And they would always ask, is this program, without us really fully getting into it, they were like, is this like a resiliency program? And we said, oh, while resilience is a factor, it is a byproduct of what we teach. What we teach is broader, is more comprehensive than just the one element. And so what we would define as resilience, and it, again, controversial, right? When we start talking about what's toughness, what's resilience. But what we said is, when you look it up, you'll see this definition a lot, is resilience is our ability to elastically come back after facing hardship, challenge, adversity, setback, whatever that is, to us to elastically come back to the same degree of emotional, strength, mental toughness as we were before that incident. Whereas you want to think bigger, because the deal with that is, what if I'm not very good? What if I'm just okay? And all of a sudden something bad happens to me, and I'm like, okay, I'm resilient. I go back to just being okay. Well, okay might have not been good enough when the bullets are flying. Okay might have not been good enough when we have to make those really challenging leadership decisions, when we have to lay off people. Okay, here's where.
Or when I have to figure out how to work with a team, and I've never worked out of my house before, and my wife and kids are here, and my kids don't understand why I can't come play with them. I mean, we've kind of been thrown into a whole different world for people to have to really handle. And a lot of people want to go back right now. It's been long enough. We're like, I just want to go back. Like you talked about resilience, snap back to where I was. And guess what? Right. I don't think we're going to get to do that.
Well, I was listening to,
yeah, go ahead.
I was listening to a live event yesterday with this guy named Ron Tite, who is a marketing and branding expert, and just an awesome guy. He's a speaker, and you know who he is as well. But he was talking about this. He was using a racing metaphor. He says that, automobile racers, like Formula One races are won in the pits and in the corners, meaning when it's your ability to time your turn just perfectly, is you brake, you get stability in the vehicle, but you make sure that you accelerate out of that turn. If you accelerate too late, if you don't accelerate optimally, then you risk losing a lot of valuable time. And so that's kind of what we're looking at. The tie-in is that's similar to what we're looking at right now. Okay, if we're just okay, if we're just resilient but not tough, if we're, if we're not able to bring that peak performance, we may get out of this okay. But all these people are passing us. The people that are still engaged, that are still out there on the racetrack while we've come into the pits, they're out there and they're just getting after it. And so it needs to be more about being tough. It needs to be more about, even though we've had to really, production may be cut by a significant amount in terms of our business output, we still need to be thinking peak performance. Even though we're suffering, even though we may be laying people off, we still need to think performance. We still need to think being able to pivot. We need to think about the exit of this turn.
Yeah. And when you do that for yourself, even just a little bit, you can then do that for others and help them, whether you're leading them directly or they're a peer of yours. And if I'm looking at this, the warrior toughness, right? It's about 3 elements, right, Steve? You have the body, the mind, and the spirit. And what I think is really cool is when you were said, hey, let's take Steve and all of his experience from the SEAL teams. Let's bring him to Great Lakes. And we're going to partner you with a chaplain and a psychologist. Now that sounds like the start of an awesome joke. A SEAL, a chaplain, and a psychologist walk into a bar.
Absolutely.
But actually you walked into Great Lakes to create this, this program. And what I think is really neat, because both the Marine Corps and the SEAL teams recognize the importance of spiritual health in addition to mental health and strong mind, mindset, and physical health and body. And a lot of time when we think of strength and toughness, we think of endurance, physical fitness, but it's so much more than that. And I'd love for maybe if you could walk through those 3 elements in a way that maybe we can start thinking about, hey, how do we work on those ourselves? And maybe how do I bring some of this to my, team or people around me?
Well, absolutely. And I will try to keep it succinct as possible, but I love talking about it because to me, it was a highlight in my career because, you walk in and you're like, all right, we're going to have everyone's can say, yeah, a Navy SEAL should know about what being a warrior toughness looks like, but a psychologist and a chaplain, like we're going to have a chaplain talking about, and the great thing is
what was your first thought when they told you this is your team?
I was like, honestly, I'll be totally honest. I'm like, what does a chaplain know about toughness? But I like to pride myself in trying to be open-minded. I'm not always as much as I should be, but I should pride myself in saying, hey, there are people that have things. If you're open-minded and your ears are open, then you're going to learn something. And what I learned is I learned a great deal from both the chaplain and the psychologist. And what I learned from, and I'll get into it, but what I learned from the chaplain is just how to lean into the things that provide you those sources of strength. And so if we look at body, mind, soul approach to being tough, it's very holistic. It considers the whole body, right? Because we need sailors, we need young officers, we need people in our workplace to be well, military physically capable especially, but we need to be healthy. We need people to be physically healthy regardless of whether they sit at a desk all day, because that's more work days that they're not going to lose. Mentally tough, they need to be able to think under pressure. They need to be able to deal with a lot of stress and still be able to function. And then lastly, in the military, we need people who are mentally tough, physically tough, but we need people of character. We need people that can make good moral and ethical decisions, and that when things get hard, that they can make the right decisions and they can lean into the things that give them strength. And an example of this is of the spiritual toughness. As you mentioned, I can't imagine being in that unenviable position of having to lay off people, of people that you like, people that you probably care a great deal about.
Yeah. She's worked with these people for most of them 10 or 15 years.
And I can't imagine just how incredibly difficult that conversation is. And the parallel that I would draw with that is, and there's times, in battle or, when some of these ships collide, with accidents, and we start having flooding of compartments. And in order to save the ship, we've got to close some of these hatches down to make sure that we have watertight spaces to keep the buoyancy of the ship. And so what that means is you may be shutting off, you may be closing a hatch, and on the other side of that are your brothers and sisters, but you are entrusted to make that right decision. That is the moral and ethical decision in the grand scheme of things that you have to make. And so you have to have that spiritual toughness to be able to do things like that, making sure that your actions and behaviors are aligned with your values, your beliefs, and that of the organization.
Yeah. And I call that piece of it, right, your true north. Because for me, my true north as a follower of Jesus is everything comes from that. But if you don't have that true north, that spiritual true north, first of all, setting kind of like that initial decision that you need to make, or even you need to have a reference so that you can actually make course corrections back in the moment. Because, when you're in a time that's unprecedented, that you feel like I'm not prepared for this, I don't have any experience, people around me who are my counselors, mentors, don't have experience even going through this, you're going to have to really connect with your core values, your core beliefs, wherever you're at spiritually, how all those line up to give you some kind of guidance, because we don't get the opportunity as leaders to sit there and not make a decision or just tell everybody it's going to be okay. We're going to have to make a decision, like closing that hatch. And then guess what? Was it the right decision or the wrong decision? And then we learn from that. We make that next decision, but we have to keep moving forward. And so question for you too is, when you guys were working with developing this program, because what I'm curious about too, I think is mind and mindset. I think there's a lot going on with people right now. When you were, tell me about that part of the program.
Which part exactly?
The mind. How did you work with people to develop mental strength?
Right. And so the mental strength, the key areas that we used as interventions for that, for building your mental performance, your mental toughness, capacity, was our psychologist, who brilliant young officer, and she really effectively grabbed the things out of other programs, a lot of things from the SEAL community in terms of their things that I didn't have when I went through SEAL training, but the performance psychology or sports psychology. And she used some of the programs that the Army used, the Marine Corps, the SEAL teams, but also the athletic world. And so she developed a curriculum that I helped support, where she would, at key moments for the recruits that were going through training, that she would teach them how to use in different mediums, how to use performance psychology techniques. In addition to that, we would practice daily mindfulness exercises or meditations, different things such as progressive muscle relaxations, mental scan. And then we'd combine that sometimes with one of the key signatures of the program was a thing that we would call recalibrate, which is really effectively box breathing with a mindfulness element. So we would prescribe it as you breathe in for 6 seconds, hold for 2, exhale for 7, hold for 2, and repeat. And what that will do is, if somebody would, she would always say, hey, if you've ever heard someone say when they're stressed out, oh, just take a deep breath. Well, what happens when you just take a deep breath is you flood more oxygen into the brain, and it helps to heighten that fight, flight, or freeze. That it speaks to that amygdala piece. And what we want to do is lower that energy in that stressful situation. And so, you have a young recruit who's fighting a fire, who's really stressed out, and they lock up. We would get them to recalibrate and lower their energy, remind them of what they need to do to be successful, and then they can re-engage. And so
that breathing pattern that you just mentioned, though, because I've actually studied that, it's something I do. And say it again, what the seconds are.
Again, this is a general prescription,
right?
And what I would want people to do is to really find out what there's apps you can use to find out what it is for them. But the general prescription would be inhale through the nose, filling your diaphragm for 6 seconds, hold for 2 seconds, exhale through your mouth with enough force to flicker a candle in front of you, right? And exhale for 7, hold for 2, and repeat. And then while we're doing this, we'll also maybe while we're training this, give the recruits some visuals to think on, like drawing a box in their mind to keep that mindfulness element. And the great thing is the psychologist would always say, whenever you get distracted, always focus on your breathing. Bring it back to your breathing when you get lost in being mindful, because that's a perfect example of something you can only do in the here and now. You can't breathe for yesterday. You can't breathe for tomorrow, she would say. You can only breathe for right now. Focus on your breathing. That will help center you back.
And here's something I just want to throw out there, everybody. You know, we hear a lot about breathing exercises, and it's in yoga, it's in all these different things. The reason that this pattern of breathing, and you should research it on your own, but it literally changes your physiology, lowers your brain chemistry, recenters yourself. Like there's been times like if I'm going up for a high pressure, talk in front of thousands of people, and I'm starting to feel the nerves and the energy, and I'm, you get that knot in your stomach. And I think, we've talked about this, right? Mostly because I want to make sure that I'm just adding tons of value for all these people that just hired me, or in front of a team, or you're in an interpersonal, conversation that starting to turn into conflict.
Exactly.
Right. I'll tell you, you just go today, everybody listening to this, you're going to have an opportunity to practice this. Trust me, because we're all working at home. Try this. Just stop, breathe in 6, pause 2, out slow 7, repeat that. And I will be willing to bet that you're going to feel very differently, or even if you're not completely out of that red zone, you're going to be able to handle the situation much better than you would have had you not done that. So, and now a body scan, I think a body scan is something a lot of people haven't heard of. I was actually on a call yesterday with a large team, Steve. This is interesting that you bring this up, because I hadn't heard of this before. And they had brought a psychologist in to work with their whole team. They do a lot of work with customer service. Their employees are really stressed out right now. They're dealing with a lot of very challenging situations with their customers from the kind of industry that they're in. They're trying to figure out how to operate as a team. They've never worked remotely before. And one of the things that this woman brought up, who was on the call with this whole team, and I got to be there too, was this body scan. It was fascinating. Could you share a little bit about that? Because that's something we could also do as we hear about it today.
Well, we always want, one of the benefits of body scan is a form of meditation. And, and I've heard some people would say, we even had some of the senior chaplains would come in and say, you're teaching Buddhism, and because, it's a very big, tenet or of Eastern religion. But really what we're doing is we're just training the brain. Okay. We don't have to necessarily.
Well, and let me say this too. The woman who was on this call is a Christian psychologist. So everybody listening. And as she went through this, and she actually pulled somebody up who was there, who said, does anybody want to talk about something that's really going on in their life right now? And she walked them through a body scan exercise. And I watched it have a powerful impact on this young lady's life, who volunteered to kind of very vulnerably in a group kind of do this with the psychologist that was on the call. But
yeah, and there's a couple different ways to do it. The way that I like to do it, and the reason I like that, I feel like it helps me, right? The research shows how effective mindfulness and meditation is, but anecdotally, I go with what I feel helps me. And when I do the body scan, what I think it helps me is it tunes me in to being self-aware, meaning one of the issues I would have sometimes is just being quick to anger when my kids or my family situation would frustrate me. And the more I meditate, the more I do that type of stuff with the body scan, the more I'm able to feel like symptoms. I don't know, as an aviator, you probably went through HAPS training, right? Does that ring a bell? High altitude pressure simulator.
Oh yeah. That was awesome. And then we got hypoxic and got all loopy.
So what HAPS training is anybody that performs at altitude. For us as high altitude parachutists, you go into a chamber, right? And slowly, you're on your oxygen mask, you're going through these procedures, and then you take your mask off at what is a simulated altitude in this pressure chamber. And now you
play patty cake.
And you start doing these tasks.
Yeah.
And you like a little bit of cognitive tasks, putting and your brain, you start to feel like yourself being really slow. You start to maybe feel your face get a little flushed. And the reason they give you that training is so you kind of understand. So if for whatever reason you're at altitude, your equipment's not working, you at least kind of know what those symptoms are.
Do you know that training absolutely saved my life? I took off on a combat mission off the carrier, and we're climbing up. And all of a sudden, I'm feeling just a little bit lightheaded. And what I noticed during HAPS when I first took my mask off is all my fingernail beds started getting really weird, this weird feeling I can't describe. But I'm
Yes, I know.
flying up to altitude to join my flight. And all of a sudden, I felt that in my fingers. And what had happened is the cockpit pressurization switch, I must have bumped it, but it was not on. So we were not pressurizing. And I think if I had not had that training, I'll guarantee you I would have done a Gary Player and just passed out, and our airplane would have just drifted off and crashed.
Yeah. No, that's a great one because, but knowing those symptoms, the same thing, knowing what happens when I get frustrated, feeling like a tightness in my chest or a flushness in my face, you know, then I'm like, all right, these are the symptoms of you getting upset. And because when you have that thought, then you can say, hey, I'm going to stay in the driver's seat. I'm going to make an intentional choice or behavior that's going to get me towards the direction. And that may be disengaging from a conversation and breathing. It may just be focused on what the outcome of this conversation, this engagement is. When we can't do that, when it's like you said, a contentious leadership discussion or a stressful presentation, is being able to just focus on self-talk your way through the clear elements. And that's why I do body scan. And I'll typically, you know, I'll take the one that I use from the app that I use, Headspace, where you start off like at the top of your head, and then you focus on key areas of your body, your brow, your lips, your throat, your chest, your solar plexus, you know, your thighs, your knee, your feet, and you kind of rest softly in each one of those areas. And like with any meditation, you'll get distracted, but you're strengthening the frontal cortex, which serves to quiet that amygdala in times of stress. You're strengthening that. And the act of you getting distracted, but gently in a non-judgmental way, bringing that focus softly, gently back is where that process happens.
Yeah, and let me share also something with everybody else out there too. After I recovered from my accident, a lot of people out there know about my accident, and I had a severe front left lobe injury, which induced brain chemistry that causes depression and anxiety. Okay, so I was really struggling with that, and even after I had a lot of healing, I still had a lot of problems with anxiety, and I was working with a therapist. And here's what they did. It was a body scan, and I was feeling anxious. And he said, well, where is it in your body? And I said, well, it's right here. And here's what he explained to me after he did this exercise. When you start to use your imagination, your brain is forced to operate differently, and you move out of that fight or flight mode into actually a much healthier place where you can process. He said, okay, reach in where that thing is and put it in your hand, that feeling. And then he started asking me all these weird questions like, okay, what does it look like? What color is it? Does it have a smell? What is it? Is it making a noise? What is it saying to you? Like all of a sudden, he's using my imagination to completely take me away from the anxiety and focus on this. I mean, that was just a simple thing that sometimes I do to realize that, and then I actually in my mind take this thing and toss it. And for me, I put up a prayer as I toss it. And I got to tell you, just doing that shifts my brain, but it also helps me to show up differently. But like you said, Steve, part of it is recognizing, hey, I'm in that situation. And you know what, everybody out there right now, if you're on a call with somebody and you're feeling that conflict, it's okay to say, you know what, I just need a little training time out right now. Can we just hit pause? Or, hey, as we're interacting this way, this is how I'm feeling. This could just be me, but I want to share it with you guys as a team.
Yeah.
Because you know, now is a time where we got to really change our communication, be a lot more to be humble and be a lot more authentic. Because if we cannot figure out how to have conflict, because let's say, Steve, you and I are on a team and we're working together and you do something and I'm sitting here and I start kind of doing this and I become like the little wounded avoider, like Steve doesn't appreciate the work I'm doing. Well, guess what? We don't have the opportunity, you know, an hour later as we're going to grab a soda or refill our coffee to maybe chat. And then you smile at me and I realize, oh, I guess Steve wasn't mad at me or didn't think I'd do a bad job. It's different now that we're remote. So there's just a lot of things that what Steve is sharing are so important, especially today. What are your thoughts on that, Steven?
Well, you know, one of my fears is is that that people are becoming a little too comfortable with being operating with a shirt and underwear on from their house and doing everything, you know, and the problem is that we're optimizing as best we can engagement, and with this situation provides opportunity for engagement. And one of the, the last, video that I shared online is how important it is for executive leaders to, yes, be informed by the echelon leadership, echelons below them, but to really say, hey, I can't talk to all the 50,000 people within my organization, but what I can do is make sure that I'm having a weekly conversation with somebody out there in shipping and receiving, with somebody out there, a sales rep in the field, somebody who's in the lower or middle management, have direct conversations and representations with those people. This is what I'm afforded with this. But having said that, we can't, to your point earlier, we can't minimize the benefit of direct interpersonal human engagement, where we get these cues, where we really get a much more accurate sense of the temperature in that room, of what that person's feeling. And so it's great that you brought up that we've got to now compensate for that a bit by being more willing to, in a very delicate and coming from a place of love or productivity, to reach out and say, hey, this is what I'm feeling, because you can't sit on it. And I remember having a conversation with somebody the other day, and they're talking about their friend who was being very, very frustrated with their manager. And this gal the other gal that I was talking with would confront the manager in a very, like, diplomatic, and just say, hey, this is what's going on. This is how this is when you say this is how I feel. But the other friend just wouldn't do it, wouldn't have that conversation. And so there's all this anger and resentment building. And so we've got to be very, like, I think you made the great point. We've got to be very out in front. We got to lean forward on making those conversations and having that engagement happen.
Well, that's true. We have to teach and train and equip our people these skills right now more than ever, because conflict can be an amazing force for innovation, creativity, and productivity if you're coming from a place of curiosity and a mindset of learning. But if I'm coming from a place of resentment or judgment, or a very kind of fixed mindset, if you guys have read Carol Dweck's book, then it becomes something that can absolutely tear an organization apart. So how about this? Conflict exists. If you train your folks, you help them to understand the body, the mind, the soul elements of what it means to be tough, right? Truly to be tough, resilience being a part of that. I loved how you explained that. You can take a lot of these dynamics that are happening now and forge them into something that's going to, right? We're all going to get through this. Nobody is going to be the same. Nobody. Whenever you go through anything challenging, nothing's is status quo. You either get better, you get gooder at your relationships, your people skills, your processes, your leadership skills, how to be a dad, a mom, a husband, a wife, or you get worse. Right? This is going to maybe reinforce some of those bad behaviors if you're not thinking about it. And so let me ask you this, because I think this is really important, because it's interesting now where we are economically, and I think how people are even thinking about training, because we're so busy. And Steve and you and I were talking about this a little bit before, kind of the entire view of training in the military, because when you were operational on the SEAL teams for 27 years, how many years were actually on the teams? Was it 27? I know you were in the Navy 27.
Yeah, it was about 20 something. Yeah.
So over 20 years, you're what we call op tempo in the military is our operational tempo. Think about that, folks, where you're at is how hard you're working, right? Are you working in that, 40 hours a week? Well, I'm guessing the SEAL teams, because I know in the aviation side of things, it was significantly more than that, especially when we're deployed.
Right. Yeah.
The mission is absolutely critical, but we saw training as an absolutely essential element to success in the operations that we were tasked to carry out. what advice would you give to people out there in the business world today about how they're viewing getting work done in this environment, and how to bring in training and the importance of training?
You know, it's hard for me. I think probably you're the same way, right? It's hard for military folks to get their hands around the fact that organizations don't see the benefit of investing in some basic core principles. The reason that SEALs are good on the battlefield, the reason that, you know, premier aviation in the military, the United States is in the world, is because the level of training, the level of analysis that we take in conducting our post-action, our debriefs, our after-action review process. And we take that process, we dissect all the elements of what went well, where we didn't perform as well, and we intentionally build that into what happens next. And I feel like so many organizations, they have, you know, like all of us, a finite amount of time. And so they're focused on production, they're focused on execution, and they don't really understand how much they're leaving on the table. And I think leadership development is a great example of that.
Well, yeah, I love that quote. There's a cartoon that's been, you know, floated around that says it's a CEO and he's talking to the CFO. And the CFO looks at him and says, well, what if we spend all, you know, we take all this time and spend this money on training, and the people we put through it, what if they leave the company? And the CEO looks at the CFO and goes, well, what if we don't spend all that time and money on training our people and they stay? Right. So I think, you know, now is the time. I got to tell you, I've been doing a lot of work with my clients, just coming in, my existing clients, just doing extra workshops on these exact skills that we're talking about, on team building workshops, on communication and dealing with conflict on remote teams. So I would just tell everybody out there, I mean, Steve and I are both available to do work exactly like this, run workshops on your team over Zoom. We can't do it in person right now. Or I would tell you right now, if you're working with somebody, like my friend's company brought in a psychologist, which is, you know, a friend of his, to just come and talk to his team, bring in some of those resources, build in training into your schedule, even if it's a few hours a week. Trust me, the ROI on that right now, because our focus has to be, well, I shouldn't say has to be. I think when our focus right now is on our people and building some of these, honestly, I think you just so nailed it, right? These whole body areas of health, right? Around our body, around our mind, around our soul, in our people, that is going to so strengthen our culture, our organization, and the people that we are working with. That is going to give us the absolute best chance to move through this in a way that we are prepared, hopefully, to, you know, to start growing again at some point if we make it through. I mean, our company, I'll tell you this right now, our company this is a really challenging period for us, but we're just working on all these things. We're training our team. We're going through it day by day.
No, and you're doing exactly what so many people have to do. They have to pivot. They have to adapt. They have to say, okay, what is the overall? What are we trying to do here? And I think the good organizations realize that your overall mission is not changing. It's how you're able to connect, how you're able to get that mission executed, the mediums in which you're going to have to use. And a lot of people, it's the same way, right? It's the food services that, yeah, you're not coming into my restaurant, but I'm going to move the food to you, or I'm even going to share ingredients with you so you can make it in your own house. You touched upon something I want to go back to, and that is the unwillingness to invest in development of the people, you know, specifically leadership, right? And it's the same thing that you exactly said. Well, it's not worth it. You know, we live in this world of uber high turnover, and people are just going to be. But what they're missing though is first establishing the reputation of being that employer of choice, where your reputation, I mean, there's organizations that do it well. There's, you know, Enterprise Rental Car, there's Johnson & Johnson, just off the top of my head. And these organizations have really good, robust, and they're known for their training. And so with that, if you're somebody who's talented, who's entering the workforce, that's where you want to go. You're attracted via that reputation. And yeah, are you going to lose some of those people? Of course you are, but you're also going to have a higher level of talent that's trying to get through your front door. And so you have that aspect as well. And I think when you look at how we typically do things often in the business world is, Jane is a great sales rep. Let's fleet her up. Let's promote her to a district or regional manager. And you're like, okay, got it. And she does it. And all of a sudden she flounders. And you see this phenomenon in the sports world, right? You have, I won't mention any names, but you have some really, really high level athletes who decide that they want to coach. Oftentimes they are completely unsuccessful because they don't understand that that's a separate set of skills. And so if we're not developing the specific leadership skills in the people that we go to promote, then, we're either going to have to fire a lot of those people, or they're not going to feel that they're able to survive it, and they're going to head to the exit door on their own. So we're really missing a lot of opportunity. You're flushing away otherwise really, really good people because you haven't taken a little bit of time and investment in them.
Yeah, you're not setting them up for success because, unfortunately, especially before all this happened, with such a tight labor market, I was seeing a ton of people being promoted because they were technically excellent at what they did. But the thing is, you got to realize, and think about this, is if you're a leader, as you moved up through management, the farther you go up, the less technical, hands-on that you need to be, right? As you move up, it's all about you casting the vision and developing other people, creating cultural excellence, communication processes, how people handle conflict. You're right, Steve. It's a different skill set. And we've been asked a lot of times to actually come in and actually do a 90-day onboarding program for new supervisors, new managers in an organization. But here's the problem is, I will not come in and do that kind of work unless I've been able to work with the senior leadership team and know that because I'm going to be teaching, and I know you do this too, I'm going to be teaching these new supervisors and leaders excellent leadership skills, communication, how to give feedback, how to show up. And if that is not supported by their boss, or that's not being modeled by their boss, what they're seeing here, it's actually going to create discontent. And I've actually seen that in some of my clients. Where it actually became a problem.
Well, yeah. For example, here's like, you have your annual leadership, or I'm sorry, your annual training meeting, whatever that looks like, where you bring the team out to Orlando or Vegas, and you bring in a high, whether it's, an athlete, military folks, or whatever it is.
We did a huge kickoff at the MGM Grand, and we had that, I won't say their name, but that group that all comes in. I thought this was going to be awesome. That are all in flight suits, and everything's based on naval aviation training. I'm like, this is going to be amazing. So yeah, I can completely relate, I think, with where you're going.
Yeah. So they bring in, and a lot of times this stuff is great. And so I had this one person tell me that they brought in a very similar person into their organization and gave them all these great nuggets. They're like, this is good stuff. They effectively translated what their military leadership experience was and how they could implement that into their strategy. Yet they immediately left that, went to their breakout sessions, and didn't address or try to use all of it. And this person was like, this was a great opportunity to take this, you spend, I don't know how much you spent bringing this person in, but now you've squandered all that. You squandered this opportunity to take the things that we were just excited and jazzed up about. And now we're not even addressing any of that in our plans moving forward. And so I think it's just another example of how they just don't understand. A lot of organizations just don't understand how to finely tune, leadership principles or just development into the actual steps and marching orders. And you're 100% right. You want to grow a program, a lot of leaders, they're like, oh, the problems are below me. It's my people, maybe it's you. And so, and so you're 100% right. That's perfect. You get them on board because that leadership developmental training has to be watered. It has to be fed. It has to be modeled.
Well, think about this. So how about that? I would love for you to share for the people out there, leaders that are out there listening right now. And like, okay, right, we're either doing some training, or we're going to add some training. What is your advice on how to take that? Let's say somebody like you come in, I come in, and we bring in some great content, some great new knowledge. How do we turn that into application, which then turns into change, so that we do things better, both either relationally or technically, or a combination of both?
Well, I'll say this. I'm kind of dogmatic about this, I admit, but it's the military in me, right? We have I am bound by my need to have structure and framework. Pre-flight checklist, right? Post-flight checklist, acronyms that we use, structures, framework, because I need
Brief and debrief and everything, right?
right, because I need process. Because if I don't have process, it means that I'm likely missing something. When it comes to how do we train, how do we take certain skill sets and turn them into actionable steps, one of the concepts I like to when I get into preparation, which includes preparation proficiencies, is first is understanding what exactly are we saying that we're good at, right? What is our big vision, right? And for you, you're like, I provide effective leadership training and other things. How I execute that is going to change based on what they want from me and what the environmental constraints are, i.e. COVID. And so we have to figure out exactly what we do. And within that, we say, all right, we're going to be, one of the concepts that we learn in the SEAL teams is being brilliant on the basics, right? At the end of the day, if I'm in a gunfight, 3 things I need to be able to do well: shoot, move, communicate. Always got to engage the enemy. I'm going to have to maneuver either away from that fight or to kill the enemy. And I'm going to have to communicate what the plan is to my teammates. And so we need to find out what basic skills enable that. Okay. And that's like, as an example right now, we're focused on things. We got that 5-meter target right in front of our face. What things do we need to do to be effective in winning the fight right now? Okay. Let's step back a little bit. We are going to go as different states start to dip their toes back into opening up, right? There's going to be some things that are specific to that transition point. So being brilliant on the basics, what skill sets do I identify to get after that? And the strategic part of us also needs to say, as you brought up, things are going to be permanently different. But let's identify a timeline for an increased level of stability when we have that new sense of what normal is going to look like. And let's start wargaming what that's going to look like. And within that, let's start to identify what some of the skills and education we need for those key areas of this transition out of this thing.
Oh, I think that is great advice. I was talking with Cheryl Batchelder, used to be CEOs of Popeye's Chickens, and she turned everything around. One of the things it's what she shared too, is, hey, you know what? You might have a team working on, hey, what is our reentry plan like, 2 to 4 weeks out? But you also need to have somebody kind of game planning and looking at a scenario 3 to 4 months out, and maybe 12 to 18 months out, because some of these might be very different, and you do need to be thinking about that in the present. But the other thing she said too, as leaders, she was hosting a roundtable, Steve, of a whole bunch of other CEOs, people that had been her peers, and they asked her to come in. And she said, hey, when you have a tough decision, how many people here immediately reach out outside of their organization to get help, think through things, talk through how to make the best decision in the moment? And she said everybody started looking around the table sheepishly, because a lot of us, are just kind of our leadership ethos is, that, hey, I'm gonna lead this team. I'm gonna help this team make the best decision. But sometimes, guess what? We need help from our peers, from our friends. So I'd also encourage people is, you know what? This is not the time. If you feel like you need to be the expert right now, let go of that and reach out to folks that can help you, whether they're your friends, peers that through maybe YPO or EO, or your coach, or you call somebody like Steve and just get a completely different perspective on it. I think that is some of probably the best advice you might get coming out of a call like this. So
that's 100% right.
Yeah. So follow it. So Steve, if you guys want to connect with Steve, it's Stephen Drum, STEPHENDRUM, just one M, StephenDrum.com. And so it's just, Steve, as we wrap this up, just any final thoughts you'd like to leave with everybody listening?
Yeah, I made this joke on the last podcast I was doing about how I never seem. It's always like I know this question's coming, yet I never seem to have the right answer for it. But I just wanna,
Okay, let's change the question.
I want to just hit on one thing you said. I thought it was an excellent point, right? You talk about looking outside your organization, and I think that's something we do well in the SEAL teams. I used to make the joke.
That's true. You guys do that amazing.
If there's a middle-aged librarian that has a really unique, good process that we can kind of steal and translate and use, we're absolutely going to do that. And I was just on a podcast the other day with
a librarian.
With a librarian. No,
yeah.
with these super fascinating guys, Brian Moran and Greg Williams, who run this organization called Arcadia Cognerati, and it's human behavior pattern recognition and analysis.
And they have a podcast. Actually, it's called Left of Greg.
Yeah,
it's actually it's fascinating. It's very different, but just
awesome.
Yeah,
you guys do. Primarily, they were doing military law enforcement, but they do corporate stuff as well. And it's some of the most fascinating training that I'd ever gotten. And so, to your point, look outside your organizations. Don't look at peers and competitors necessarily. That's good too. Look at get innovation creativity by looking at something completely different than your community, your industry.
Yeah. Great advice. Well, Drummy, man, thank you for your service. Thank you for your time. And I appreciate this, man. We'll have to do this again soon.
That was a lot of fun. Always a pleasure, John. Thank you.
You got it. See you, champ.